What was that? No, not unless you want to see it. I don't think we're going to have time because this is a 20-minute long video. I was trying to find my remarks from the previous week. We'll just have to go off the PowerPoint. I'm not finding it here. So last week, I'm filling in for Jacob Larson, he's, I think this will be his last week away, so next week you'll see him and you'll be back on with the Habakkuk Bible study. What I was doing last week was trying to introduce you to a video that came out by the WCF Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation. And in preparation for that, I was doing some reading from the scriptures, Ezekiel 37, which is the resurrection chapter, talking about the regathering of the nation of Israel in the latter days on the mountains of Israel. And there'd be one king, my servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd. And this was kind of leading us up to a current event news item, which of course hard to hide. It's on headlines. Most of our daily newspapers has to do with the Hamas-Israel war. There was, hard to believe, amongst the Jewish different branches within Judaism, disagreement over whether the restoration or return to Israel was actually a good thing. There were a couple, I think the ultra-Orthodox Reform Judaism, they were a little concerned about the return of Jews prior to the advent of Messiah. This is a quote from the 19th century from the Reform Judaism. It was a conference. I'll just highlight the red part. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and we therefore expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. Quite out of line as far as what we believe. Well, let me just back up here. So what they're trying to do is just, they're identifying themselves as a religious community, and the idea of a homeland in Israel, Palestine, was going to have to wait until Messiah arrived. If that was the mentality of all the Jews, they would not have found themselves in Palestine today. Of course, God had other plans, but it is interesting looking back in history how within Judaism, and even today, there is a hesitation to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Israeli state, which is clearly a secular state, it's not a religious state. And I highlighted John Thomas's, probably one of his most famous quotes about there is still remaining a partial and primary restoration of the Jews before the advent of Christ, which is to serve as a nucleus or basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he, referring to Messiah, has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-eventual colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of Messiah's ship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate thither as agriculturalists and traders in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth, but more immediately of getting rich in silver and gold by commerce with India and in cattle and goods by their industry at home under the efficient protection of the British power. I mean, he basically hit the ball out of the ballpark with everybody on base. This being 100 years before the establishment of the Jewish state. Not bad. Hmm? Well, I don't know if John Thomas would have foreseen the Holocaust. Yeah, exactly. Sure. Although if you read Zechariah talking about 2/3 would go through the fire and 1/3 would come through. Exactly the proportions of what happened in Europe with the Jews in Europe. I mean, you could perhaps have prophesied the Holocaust if you were to look at Esther and see what happens when there's a decree that you can go back to your homeland and you drag your feet, because they knew about Jeremiah's prophecy in 70 years that there would be a return to Jerusalem. The Jews in Esther's time would have known that, but they dragged their feet, and what happens? You get Haman and the persecution. So you could say you could foretell from the scriptures that something like this could happen. But nonetheless, getting to your question, it was God's plan, and it turned out that it did. I think John Thomas, looking at his time, the thought of being persecuted to the degree that we saw in the Holocaust would drive them to Israel. That would have been a really hard thing to have pulled. You could have, like you just said, but it would have been difficult to prophesy, or at least spoken of that as a Bible student. But from his perspective, it's still close. I mean, the prosperity of Israel as a state, just her economic stance in the world, is a fulfillment of what John Thomas was saying. And the bottom line, though, is they were going to be returning in unbelief. That's the bottom line. They were not coming back, as the Reformed Judaism statement said. We are just simply a religious community, but we're not looking for a political state. We'll wait for Messiah to appear to establish all that. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. Okay. No more than 12 hours after I gave my Sunday school class last week, what happened in Israel? So last Sunday, within 12 hours, and of course Israel's a little bit ahead of us time-wise on the planet. What happened was the bombing of the refugee camp in Rafah in Palestine. Actually, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. What I have here on the screen, I don't know how many of you are aware that Israel has passed laws that will clamp down on news establishments that don't toe the line as far as being pro-Israel. There's laws that within the last month have been passed. Al Jazeera, if you're familiar, is a news conglomerate that Al Jazeera actually means the peninsula, referring to the Arabian Peninsula. So Al Jazeera is a news source that reports on Arabic or things of interest in the Middle East for mostly an Arabic for Arabic consumption, but they do have English outlets here. And this one at their website has this article talking about what happened. Al Jazeera was actually banned from Israel. They had their offices closed down. You cannot get to their website if you're in Israel. You will not be able to stream anything on cable if you're in Israel. Al Jazeera is gone black, off the line, so to speak. Why I have this up here, besides just bringing you up to speed, is because I've got a short video. There's some graphic violence. I'm going to skip ahead and jump over that like I did last week. But what's interesting is this video that I'm going to show you would not be seen in Israel. Okay? Even this Al Jazeera website article here would not be seen in Israel because Israel has banned Al Jazeera, closed down their offices, told them to leave. So let's see if I can switch. Last week we had a little bit of a problem. As far as the audio.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, so we get the audio working here. So this, I want to show you like the first 10 seconds or so, and this is what I was asking, if how many of us remember. I mean, to me, it was one of the most important news items of the week, besides, we won't mention the U.S. president.
يا ساتر يابا البراق يابا
Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead.
قاعد أفضل الشوارع كلها معاه والنهار قاعدة.
جيش قادم جيش محتل قادم مش آمن بغزة لا يوجد آمن مش شيء لا طفل آمن ولا شيخ ولا امرأة
The court considered that in conformity with the obligation under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offense and any other action in the Rafah government which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about physical destruction in whole or in part.
And happily, what we have seen in the immediate hours is that Israel continues the military action that has been asked to stop.
So as I said, unless you've got a way to hide your IP address, no one in Israel is going to see that because Al Jazeera has been banned in Israel. Why am I showing this to you? Well, the rest of the world is seeing this. Doesn't it apply usually do full screen? Okay. How do you bring up, normally there's, oh, here it is. Oh, it's a concurrent slide, that'll work. Okay, so why am I showing this to you? Because the rest of the world is seeing this and seeing the video. And of course, the world is condemning Israel. You saw the reference to genocide. The word is now being thrown out as far as what Israel is doing in Palestine. The bottom line is that Israel is becoming a pariah on the world stage. This should be of interest to us, seeing how we have historically supported Israel. So this was leading up to, does anyone have any comments about the Rafah attack? And go ahead.
After that report came out, I read something that said that the problem was that Hamas had hidden munitions in that area and that munitions exploded, and that's what caused the problem.
Yeah, I've heard things about like fuel oil also may have tank may have been hit and ruptured, but we really don't know. The bottom line is it looks horrible on the world stage, okay, even if it was a total accident. And this is becoming almost like a weekly affair, because last week the news item I had was how the International Court had suggested or recommended for arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu. So Israel is really coming across with a really bad image on the world stage. Robert?
I guess my comment is that events can be shaped in a way that becomes propaganda, and it can sway reality to, a position, and I think that's what's happening in the world now. it's all part of God's plan to for Israel to be pretty much alone when they look. They have no other choice but to look for Christ. Being a secular nation mainly is part of God's plan. They're still God's people. So I think you had mentioned, we have historically supported Israel. We're always to be friends of Israel. Genesis 12, from the very beginning, I will bless those that bless you and curse those who I will curse, and all people on the earth will be blessed through you. So regardless of propaganda, mistakes, Israel fighting for its very survival, God has told us to be their friends, not call balls and strikes, because this is the way God has planned it for the world, and we shouldn't be caught up by what could be. There's some facts and reality in that video, but it can be shaped in a way that it becomes propaganda. That's my point.
Sure. Well, can I stop? First thing, the verse you quoted actually was being quoted to Abraham. It says God's speaking to Abraham directly. So if he's saying, who blesses thee, Abraham, will be blessed. However, there are other verses. I'm just pointing out that particular verse you quoted is actually being spoken to Abraham. There are other verses in the Bible. He who touches the apple of my eye, referring to Israel, also Israel being God's witnesses. So I'm not disputing that whatsoever. I'm just saying that particular verse is not, I would say, the best one. Well, but the subject, the object that God is speaking to is Abraham specifically, not the nation of Israel. But again, I'm confirming there are other verses in the Bible that support the idea that, cursing Israel or coming against God's witnesses is not a very good idea. I also want to make it clear, I'm not spouting propaganda. What I'm trying to do is bring us up to speed what's going on in the world as far as how the world is seeing this. Where the undercurrent here of this is I'm trying to get to bring us to understand the anti-Semitism that is beginning to boil within the world. Okay, so that I'm not quite through with my class. What I'm trying to do is show how Israel is becoming a pariah on the world stage and how that can affect things going forward as far as Israel's how she's going to end up standing alone in the last days.
We shouldn't allow ourselves to be caught up in what the world is, their perception, because we're looking at it through God's eyes and not through the world's eyes. So we have to say, where are we going to get our news? It's going to be from the Bible, because all this has been predicted, and there's a lot of nuances that we could never, predict are going to happen in the way that God is bringing it about. So as followers of Christ, our perspective should not change.
I'm not suggesting that our perspective should change. When I say historically includes from this second going backwards in time. What I'm trying to show is it is important to know how the world is viewing Israel. If all the nations come up against Israel, it'd be nice to say, oh, I can actually see why that's happening, and we can see how this is being viewed outside of a biblical framework. When you have a world that does not study the Bible and is ignorant of the scriptures, this is what they're seeing, and they're going to have a natural gut reaction, which is to condemn Israel. So just want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding where I'm coming from. Leah?
I understand where you're going with it, Phil, and that you're trying to give us that perspective from the world, which is important for us to know what God is doing and how the spirit that is in the leaders of the world to bring things about till Christ's return with his nation, his chosen nation. But as for us being believers, as Brother Robert was saying, we know that there's a different narrative in the Bible. And I just wanted to let everyone know, if you're not aware, that you can find Israeli news very easily on YouTube. ILTV is a great source. Roger and I watch it every day, and you will get the narrative straight from the horse's mouth, straight from the Israel defense ministers to those who have boots on the ground. You know, they're telling you exactly what happened with that explosion, and they just said that the munitions that they used were way too small to have caused that big of an explosion, that they weren't even capable of doing that, so that there must have been something else involved which didn't have anything to do with Israel.
Right. Like I said, I'm aware of what could have happened. What I'm trying to get across is the world is not following the news the way that you and Robert and I am, to the nth degree, as to what could be a possible alternative explanation for what happened. This is what's being fed to, you know, often it's like a 1-minute soundbite, very brief video showing the atrocities, the world stage condemning Israel. That's what's being presented on both news outlets. So I'm just trying to bring us up to speed. This is how the world's doing, because I was hoping to get to a point where I can talk about what was happening on the college campuses and why the young people are turning against Israel and supporting Palestine, and how that would affect things going forward if Jesus doesn't return for 20 years, 40 years. We're having a younger generation that's seeing this, rooting for the underdog. Today's young people are going to be tomorrow's politicians, and this is going to affect how the world reacts to Israel when Jesus returns. So this is where I'm all going with this, trying to build up the anti-Semitism that is increasing, and how over time this can affect how things play out on the world stage as far as Israel being left alone by herself. So that's where I was trying to bring all this. Okay, Roger?
You and I talked with you last week about this, and it's the way that I have been able to appreciate what's happening in the world from God's eyes, is that in order for all these things to come to pass, for all nations to turn against Israel, obviously the Lord has to be involved. And I think that it goes hand in hand with like the evil spirit that was put into Saul, where he seemed to think almost insanely, even with his own son, about killing him and all. And to us, the rationale is, can't they see what Israel tries to do? You know, they try to warn people, they drop flyers from the air, they bring in food, but regardless, they tag it as genocide. So I see an evil spirit that God has put into the nations, just like he did Saul, just like when he hardened Pharaoh's heart. God did those things to make the situations that have been prophesied come to pass. So on a very much simpler level, I just think we're seeing this evil spirit that God has brought upon the nations that almost seems like madness from one end of the planet to the other, like these college demonstrations, and people who don't even know the backstory on Israel are just ready to see Israel annihilated when before they never spoke up about it. So that's just something I've always felt, and it made it easy to make it palatable what's happening.
With reference to madness, it can also be understood madness can not only just be a deranged state of mind, but it can also be anger. And, you know, when you see stuff like this, it is natural to get angry. There's this reference in Revelation about the three unclean, the unclean spirits, the three frogs, goes out, and often is seen as the fraternity, or the motto of the French Revolution, equality, brotherhood, whatever. That actually, if I had time, which I don't think I'm going to into anymore, there was an article that the Christadelphian Advocate online version brought to my attention. It was an article about what's going on the campuses. It was written by a Canadian professor. And he was actually looking at what is driving the protests that are occurring on the college campuses among the young people. It's definitely worth reading. I printed it out. I'm going to have to This is not working the way I thought it was going to work, because I was hoping to pick up where we left off last week with the video, but since we've gone the route of the unclean spirits, or the madness that's driving the nations, this article actually kind of fits it very well, because it brings up how Marxist ideas are infiltrating colleges' campuses, and a lot of the professors have this worldview of Marxism. What is Marxism? It's very close to this. It's a class struggle between the haves and the have-nots, which was behind the Russian Revolution and a lot of what happened with communism. But it's interesting how Marxism is being brought into what's going on in the Middle East, because now Israel is seen as the upper class, as the haves, and the Palestinians are seen as the have-nots, the oppressed. And this is being taught within the college campuses. I'm going to just read a little bit from this article. I found it enlightening. The sudden uprising of university students across North America in support of Hamas and allegedly about the welfare of Palestinians does not result, for most students, from close ties with people on the other side of the world. Of course, there is in North America a small minority of Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students who are strong advocates based on their ethnicity and religion. But the vast number of student protesters have no such personal ties. Why have they set aside their studies to take up activism? We know that the reason for the uprising is not that the student activists have studied deeply the history and politics of the Middle East, the history and theology of Islam and Judaism, and how international relations more broadly influence the region. Few of the students are majoring or minoring in Middle Eastern history and current affairs, Islamic history and theology, or Jewish history and theology. We know that many of the students chanting "From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free," the idea is free of Jews. Those who are chanting this, a large number cannot even name the river or the sea, which I thought was a little bit humorous. How many of the students could identify Israel or Gaza on a map is uncertain. If ties to or knowledge of the region are not behind the fevered advocacy of Hamas, what is? One factor that is undeniable is the highly organized, well-funded Muslim lobby, sponsors of Students for Justice in Palestine, a particular movement, and other Palestine and Islam advocacy groups, which have branches and universities across the land. Their partisanship and relentless lobbying have no doubt influenced student opinion to some degree. However, most students do not identify as Palestinian and Muslim, so their engagement on these bases is not strong. Something else must be at work. By far, the dominant ideology in universities is the far leftist conception of social justice, generally defined and implemented as diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. And this sounded a lot like the motto of the French Revolution, which I unfortunately don't remember, but talking about fraternity, equality, et cetera. Liberty, equality, okay. It just seemed like it rhymed. Diversity, equity, and inclusion sounds very close to that particular motto. This is not a student invention, but a policy imposed from the highest level. Universities have had this far left ideology and its implementation imposed on them by government fiat, but most universities were far from reluctant because almost all academic staff and administration officials were children or grandchildren of the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s who either self-identified as Marxists or accepted Marxist analysis and policies. Social justice is based on Marxist class conflict analysis. In this view, society has not many individuals and groups competing and cooperating over space and time. Rather, the only important relationships in society with respect to a Marxist worldview are based on the conflict between classes. One class being the oppressor and the exploiter, the other class being the exploited and oppressed victim. So you can see where this is going and tying into the Palestinian support on the campuses. Classical Marxism framed class conflict in terms of economic classes, but that formulation never took hold in North America. The new revised North American Marxism can be labeled cultural Marxism because it identifies classes based on sex, race, sexuality, ability, ethnicity, and religion. What is critical is that the classes of oppressors and victims be identified. So that's really the bottom line. He's pointing to what's going on the campuses is there's this Marxist, we call it madness, but spirit that the young people are imbibing. It goes on halfway through the article. What does this have to do with Israel? Well, if Jews are white oppressors, then Israel must also be. The social justice analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that Israelis are the white oppressors and the Palestinian Arabs are the oppressed. And this is not even to consider never mind, skip that. And I think this is the last section I want to highlight. The campus uprisings do not concern themselves with historical facts. Okay, and this is getting to what Robert was pointing out, yeah, we may know the truth, we may know the facts, but the world stage is ignorant of the Bible and pretty much what this professor is pointing out. The campus uprisings do not concern themselves with historical facts. It is clear to them who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and morality means supporting the good guys and attacking the bad guys. Repeatedly we have heard, we are Hamas, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, genocide in Gaza, Israel go to hell, the only solution is intifada revolution, and 10,000 more October the 7th. These are the slogans that you are finding on the campuses. To the demonstrators, Israel is the evil, racist oppressor of innocent Gazans and Palestinians. So again, I'm not trying to spout propaganda. I'm trying to bring us up to speed on how the world is viewing what's going on in the Middle East. And to me, I think it's important as Bible students how we see Israel. And right now, she's got the support of the U.S., but that's kind of iffy. And it's interesting how this may, in fact, play out with the presidential elections coming up. It's interesting if you look back over time how, as Robert was kind of pointing out, as far as the blessing on Israel and the cursing, when there are policies that the U.S. enforce that are not for the welfare of Israel, often something of importance happens in the U.S., sometimes to the negative. So the question is, what would drive even the U.S. away from Israel? And what you're seeing play out on the world stage, the Rafah bombings, even if there's a total accident and there's an explanation that has nothing to do with Israel killing innocent refugees, it still plays out the same. Israel is becoming a pariah on the world stage. And I think this has significance to us as Bible students, not trying to spout anti-Israel rhetoric. I do think when we have to go out into the world, when we have to deal with our coworkers, our friends, we have to be aware of how they're viewing things, and we cannot just insensitively say, well, this is the way God wants it, and Israel's going to be victorious. It's going to not come across very well if you're trying to win another person. This is not the way, this is really not the way to do it. And we should be aware of how our support of Israel can perhaps hurt our attempt to reach other people. And I'm trying to bring a little bit more sensitivity into the discussion. That was really what the video that we never finished last week was trying to bring up, trying to be more sensitive to the people that we encounter on a daily basis. Okay, so I'm not changing anything as far as our historic support of Israel. I'm trying to say that we have to live in the world, interact with the world, and this is what the world's seeing, and how are we presenting ourselves as supporters of Israel and as Bible students. Let's just be sensitive. So I don't know how much more time. We pretty much run out of time. I was just say, it's definitely worth watching it, because I'm not going to be here next week. It's definitely worth going to the WCF website if you haven't done so and watch the whole video. Rob?
I was going to say is, it's very complicated because we want to support Israel, but the state of Israel is a secular state.
Yeah.
And we're aligned with the spiritual Israel and God's people, both by birthright through Abraham, and then spiritual Israel. So I think we have to understand the eternal purpose of God with the Israel that we know as the Israel that God is regarding. And the secular Israel is just a byproduct of the process. You know, even the state of Israel, while it has its significant, its historical significance, that's not the state of Israel that's going to be.
Yeah, what we see today, it's a quasi, I mean, half the Israelis today are atheists. And of course, you know, the military, it's not Christian, it's, you know, the leadership in Israel can change overnight, or, you know, it is in flux. The fact is, though, the return of Israel is a sign that God is at work, that Israel is are the witnesses of God. And that's the most important thing. We don't want to undermine that, but they are players on the world stage, and we should be at least aware of what's going on and how it's viewed. So thank you.